Fire Radio.
Probably I can turn the chair towards the camera a little bit so I don't look so weird. There we go.
This is off to a great start. Hey, everybody, it's Rob, National Fire Radio, the gospel. I am excited this morning to interview somebody who I've known for a year and a day. Just kidding. So I've actually got my good friend, Christopher Morabito, retired United States Army EOD tech, currently works for the United States Army with DOD as a civilian. Is that the right way to say it, Chris?
Yeah, I'm a Department of the Army civilian.
So, which means he doesn't have to sweep the parking lot or mop the lake or any of that stupid stuff the Army used to make you do. But
I get fat, grow facial hair.
Right, and have that awesome T-shirt on.
Yeah, party cats.
So one of the things is, for those who are listening, Chris and I used to work together for a company called Alamo EMS. He was my old paramedic partner. It's where our friendship began some 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been able to get rid of me, and I haven't been able to get rid of him. So it's been an interesting friendship. But out of that time, Chris went from being a paramedic to also just trying to get this out of here to also going back. You were in the United States Navy for a little bit, and then you re-enlisted back into the United States Army, and you became an explosive ordinance disposal technician, in which you lied to me and told me that it would never be dangerous the whole time. But it gave you a very specific skill set. I feel like I'm Liam Nielsen here and Taken.
Yeah. Is somebody going to be hiding under the bed that I got to warn them that they're going to get taken?
Right. But kind of tell the audience what being an explosive ordnance disposal technician is for those who don't know what EOD does.
Okay. Well, it's the concept behind it is to be able to mitigate everything that is an explosives hazard. So that includes any ordnance of any type. And for those of you that want a more clear definition of ordnance, that goes anywhere between something as small as a 25 millimeter, what we call projectile, what everybody else would call a bullet, all the way up to 155s, 8-inch rounds, 16-inch rounds that were fired out of like battleship guns, because we span the military owns that ordnance from cradle to grave. It's always them. So whether or not it's something that was just produced yesterday or it was produced 200 years ago, that doesn't matter. That counts as an explosive ordnance. Or also to include missiles, rockets, grenades, mortars, you name it. If there's an explosive in it, that's our purview. But then even more so in more modern day, what everybody kind of thinks of still is the IED threat that's out there, improvised explosive device. Again, it's got explosives in it. So somebody, whether it was commercially manufactured or somebody put it together in their basement, garage, cave, tunnel, what have you, that still falls underneath the EOD purview. So the concept is to be able to mitigate that hazard, and through any number of ways. Most technically is to mitigate it so it doesn't detonate in an area where that area cannot sustain a high order detonation. In other words, you can't just go out there and countercharge the main charge and blow it up because it's next to a hospital or a school or some other kind of critical infrastructure or people. So that's the bread and butter of EOD.
And on your background too, I also want to add for everybody, Chris is also a volunteer firefighter. We actually served together in Arlington at Croft Corners at one point before we both went on to our respective careers.
Yeah, that was a minute ago.
Yeah. But I think that's the important part of this conversation, right, Chris, is because, you have a skill set of this explosive ordnance disposal technician. And when you're talking about IEDs, and you hit it, it's commercially manufactured or homegrown, and like people forget that I think they they link an IED to Iraq and Afghanistan and our MRAPs Humvees troops getting blown up.
Yep.
But in reality, we're seeing this stuff happen here in the United States. The most notable one that I remember is technically wasn't Timothy McVeigh's bombing in Oklahoma City some kind of improvised explosive device. Like he was using different components. He had some fertilizers. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying not to get on a watch list here, but with you, it's kind of impossible. We'll circle back to that. But like IED attacks are happening.
Yeah. No, and that's, yeah, and Timothy McVeigh is a great example. And obviously, even if you go to the, like we did, go to the Oklahoma City, the bombing museum. They even talk about that there and what that is. And it's every bit of it was a vehicle-borne IED, without a doubt. And so, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be foreign. It could also be domestic. And, even go to the smaller scale to kind of put it in perspective. And that's obviously, that was a large scale disaster. It was, it was a horrible thing. But, a lot of times you can come across a situation, and a lot of local police departments come across this a lot of times, is utilizing some kind of booby trap devices to protect their, whatever illicit things they're doing. That happens a lot, whether it's, protecting their meth houses or protecting their, if they're growing marijuana or what have you, a lot of times they'll use these devices to actually protect these areas. So that's still, it's just as dangerous to one person, it might not necessarily be looking to, harm, hundreds of people, but these things are still out there. So you're going to come across these situations, even in an area that you wouldn't think so. In fact, even more rural, I would say, would make it more susceptible, more likely that you could have that kind of, if you have a huge meth problem. That's something that, every now and then, like, we would get called to assist on stuff like that. Because the FBI or the local police department, well, through coordination with the FBI, would call the military bomb squads, and they would go and respond. We do call defense support to civilian authorities.
Now, Chris, just to kind of, when it comes to talking about, like you've mentioned, if you have a meth problem, and we're not talking about your own personal use, like
I got my own teeth.
Yeah. Yeah, but like, and I remember, so like Chris came up and did a class in Poughkeepsie a long time ago when I first got promoted, with some other units from, was it Fort Drum, right?
Yeah, they ran Drum.
And one of the things that you said, you were like, hey, if you have a meth lab, the components of making methamphetamine, you have, your product can make the thing to protect it as well. And you can make, and I forget which explosive we were running into the same, because I always get them all confused. And I mean, it goes boom. I don't want to deal with it, right? Like,
but yeah, no, and that's I think it's a very key point, especially like as obviously we're talking about something specific to National Fire Radio here, so we have a specific audience. So to kind of bring it home and maybe emphasize that so what point a little bit more is absolutely, especially when you look at the materials that to go into making meth, you're not far off. You've got all the lab equipment, a couple tweaks to the recipes, and you can just as easily make homemade explosives. You can make primary explosives, you can make main explosives, their main charges. It's not hard.
Which was it ANFO that methamphetamine can go into, or
no. Well, you can kind of there's a couple different ones, and so without really getting too far into the recipes, very easily to make. Well, not easy, but with the right lab equipment, you can make homemade blasting caps using TATP or HMTD. Those are very popular, common things that I'm going to share a recipe. Don't want everybody out here, trying to blow their fingers off.
Yeah, this is not a cooking show today, all right?
Yeah. So yeah, and that's the thing is, and when you start talking about things like ANFO or urea nitrate, things like that for the main charges, and so it's easy enough to combine those two, because you want to have, when I say primary, that's the kind of thing that would go in a blasting cap. So like a commercial blasting cap has like lead azide or something along those lines in it. So the idea when you have to set up an explosive train, so you want to go from something that's very sensitive, a small charge, and something slightly less sensitive but more kick, and then into something much into your main charge. You can't just go out there and hit ammonium nitrate with a hammer. You can bang on it all day, and chances are you're going to be okay. I don't recommend that anybody does that, but if you're looking for reliability of function, just going out there and hitting it with a hammer or lighting it on fire, it's not going to get you where you want to be. So that's why you would use this explosive train to go from most sensitive but smallest amount, because they are very sensitive. So if you don't want to blow yourself up, all the way up to the main charge, which is the least sensitive, but it's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck.
I think the known to the unknown for the fire service is like a heavy timber building where, like, if I took a match to a heavy piece of heavy timber, it's not going to light on fire and go blaze away. But I have to build a fuel package if I wanted to light that building. So, and that could be like a trail of gasoline leading up to pallets, leading up next to the building components, which will eventually catch fire. Same thing's going to happen with explosive devices. We want to have something that, I think you used the term before, a kicker, something to kick it off. and because it's just not there is a science to this.
Yeah, no, there really is. It's
just
easy.
I want to cut you off real quick, just so everybody understands the science of this. Chris and I are friends, and we are going to probably at some point start picking on each other, and we'll detract from the podcast. But at my wedding, we had to make the signature drink, and he looked at the recipe and converted it in his head. And I said, "Are you sure?" Because I didn't trust him. And he said, "It's." Yeah, that's what you said. He's like, "It's like explosives. I do this all the time. Don't worry." Sorry. So going back into it, like the science of it, like there is a process to this. It's like you're not. I think Jerry Erb says you're not, baking a cake, you're grilling a steak. Well, here you are baking the cake. The ingredients have to be pretty exact.
Yeah, you want to get as close as possible. There's some variances, especially when you start talking about homemade explosives. But the physics. So when you come into explosives, there's a lot of physics go into it with some mathematics and obviously chemistry. So because you're trying to figure out obviously the chemistry, it's a chemical reaction, that's violently reacting, whether it's commercial or homemade explosives. So you're getting that reaction, and then of course, you're applying that chemistry into physics, and you're gonna have now applied physics, because you're gonna try to figure out the blast and blast effects and the second and third order effects of that detonation itself. So, it's not just that blast wave that you're going to be trying to carry. Are you encasing it with some kind of purpose-built fragmentation, or are you or is it just a matter of, are you having to take into secondary fragmentation, such as like construction materials or just rocks around and whatnot? So there's a lot of factors that go into consideration factors when you start when you start looking at what do I have in front of me, what do I have to worry about? So yeah, there's a bit that goes into it, no doubt.
What I had a question, I just lost it. So for first responders, like, you have this is the advantage for you is you did walk the walk. You were a paramedic. We were working 911 shifts together. You were a firefighter, so you understand the basics of what it is, the approach is. What do you think the American Fire Service is missing when it's coming to this approach of explosives? Because I know for myself, like, I have to do the training every year now. I'm the MTO, right? And it's the same, like, weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
Look out for terrorism. If you see, and it's like,
yeah.
But it.
Yeah. So I think, and this is just my opinion, and of course,
Mm-hmm.
I fully expect you get 10 different bomb techs in a room, you're going to have 10 different opinions on things about how to do things and ideas. But for my 2 cents, I think one of the things, when they put out this training that's out there, and the Department of Homeland Security has that, and a couple other obviously agencies, they produce something similar to that. This is what an IED looks like, or this is what this is mass, weapon of mass destruction consideration. I think there's even a section in the ERG, if I remember correctly, with detonation hazards. I remember, but the problem is that it's very general, it's very broad. So when it comes down to the rubber meets the road, one, I think that a lot of the fire service may not necessarily be looking at it from that lens. It's fresh in your mind when something first happens. Like, let's take the Boston Marathon bombing. Well, all of a sudden, okay, yeah, first responders started considering that this might be something that needs to go into their training. But as time goes by, and something like that hasn't happened, it hasn't been fresh, you start getting the oh, it won't happen to us mentality. Why this area? Why Poughkeepsie?
Right.
I think that's a pitfall. And then, so because of that, I think that you're just not keeping, you can generalize it, but do you really know what we're looking at for IEDs? What it would actually, would you recognize one when you came across it? And then, so then what do you do about it? What's your, have you actually updated, your TTPs? Very similar to tactics, your tactics. So it's very similar, kind of like even I think when you're doing a fire response, is the area that you're set up safe? So, when it starts coming down to that line and that mindset where, okay, well, all of a sudden I had something that came from together, like a building, comes together very rapidly. Do I do a quick check around me and see if anything looks quite not in place? And if it's something as simple as like, okay, a gas leak, am I parked someplace where there's still gas? Well, the same concept goes for explosives too, obviously. Similar concept. It's going to have similar results. So, you obviously want to check your safe area. And so I think that, and not recognizing, what you're actually looking at, then you're going to be missing out on that, a very key piece. I'm not trying to, sow paranoia into everybody, but I definitely think you have a situation where, something has obviously sustained a mass detonation for, for whatever reason, because you don't know until you get up there. I think it's worth kind of looking around and taking a quick look underneath your truck and your engine and making sure that's clear, and just give a quick look around and make sure there's nothing else that looks kind of squirrely. Obviously you do a scene assessment. Are you near a bunch of propane tanks? Things along those lines. Well, also look for packages, or obviously if we're going back to the Boston Marathon bombing, look for pressure cookers. There's some things that that can be done to make sure that you're safe. So I think it's important to apply that in when you've got an incident. It could be, don't just assume, hey, it's this one thing, especially when it doesn't take very long to just kind of give a look at it.
And also, like, I'm trying to think of, I know there was a gender reveal party where somebody did something and they blew
Yeah, they made a
themselves up.
pipe bomb. That was brilliant. I read that. I was like, wow, that was
so
that was not smart.
And this goes from like the realm of, hey, this could be, we can talk about terrorism, and like we make the joke of Aloha snack bar.
Yep.
But like, some kind of radical, like, I don't want to say radical. Well, I think radical Islamic terrorism, is a type, or something motivated by religion.
Sure. Yep.
To, some kind of gun-ho militia who's like, we're going to take back the country, and like, but there also is this realm of, just idiots who are keeping us employed. Like this guy with the gender reveal party made a pipe bomb, and
people are going to do dumb things. So I would definitely say that I have responded due to, something, just ignorance, plain ignorance. So in that scenario, they made a pipe bomb, and without knowing they were making a pipe bomb, because they don't know what, clearly they didn't know what goes into it. Because I don't think they would have if that, if they had. I'd be very surprised if they knowingly went into that and did that.
A really shitty way to get out of child support,
Yeah, no kidding. But so things like that, playing with crap you just don't understand, mixing chemicals. I mean, as even in the fire service, you mix A with B, and all of a sudden you get a hypergolic reaction, and something is now spontaneously igniting. So I mean, this ignorance happens, and it may not necessarily be malicious, but hey, the end results are still the same. That's the thing I find kind of. I couldn't even begin to tell you how many times I came across, old ordnance that people found and were using as doorstops. And these things, were still live.
like a mortar, and they were just like, hey.
Yeah. I have one up in Tulsa. Did a response up there because somebody happened to be visiting, friends, and they were like, oh, hey, that's I think it's explosives. And they called the police, and the police called us. But yeah, it was like it was an old 105 millimeter projectile that was filled with had a base detonating fuse and everything in it. Despite the fact that it was from World War II, and it's still live. So yeah, I've had those responses before where it's people just don't know, and they're like, oh, this thing looks really neat. but these things are still live. They're still lethal. Sure enough, when we went out, we took it out to the range, and we blew it up out there in the range in an area that was safe to do that. And that thing left a really nice crater. And that would have it would have definitely ripped apart some. It would have done some serious damage. Not only would have probably knocked out that section of that house right there in the front room. I would say, if I had to just guess, visualize it in my head, you definitely would have affected the structures nearby. You definitely would have propelled fragment into the surrounding homes, because something thicker case like that fragmentation is gonna propel. So and those heavier pieces propel harder because there's still that same energy is applied to that fragmentation, that piece, but now it carries more with it. So there's you need there's a lot more momentum behind it to stop that thing. You're just going to go through a house. Bottom line.
And anything that's in between it.
Yeah, exactly. Anything that's in between it. So these things happen. We've got calls where we pick up old Civil War cannonballs because they're still alive with black powder fuses in them. There was a guy when I was down in Fort Belvoir that actually ended up blowing himself up because he was trying to. He was a collector and was trying to drill it out, and I guess he was going to try and save it himself, and ended up sparking it off, and it blew up and killed him. This is a Civil War cannonball. You would think, oh wow, it's that old. No, well, some of the stuff gets even worse the older it gets.
So and for the viewers and listeners, Chris has had how many years did you put into the Army?
Well, I got 13 years in service.
So in that time, he's had a couple different places that he's moved around, and one of them was at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. And I remember, like, the fun part of all this was, when I would go visit you on the Aberdeen side at your house, it was like drive in, license registration, visitor pass. And then when you were at the shop, you were just like, yeah, just come in, tell them you're going to building 6210 or whatever it was. And I went to the shop, and but in there you had a mine from the Civil War that they had taken out of the Baltimore Harbor. I think it was the story with it.
Well, no, yeah, I think we had a cannonball is what it was, and it was because Fort what is it by there? Fort Hamilton, is that right? There's no Civil War fort, but yeah, because and that's actually kind of it's, So, and the funny thing is that there's a lot of stuff that, a lot of this ground has been turned back over to the civilian populace. But overall, as a whole, as the country was growing, a lot of times they didn't take care of their stuff the way that we do now. So the technique was just to either dump it in a bay or a harbor or bury it. And so now that stuff, a lot of that just comes unburied and it pops up. There's a lot of sites that are out there that, or even that area may have been old ranges that, the government sold back out to the town and they've developed on these sites. So a lot of this stuff, it's still out there. It's very much still out there. There's a whole career field, of having to mitigate areas that were once old ranges.
Yeah.
That job I worked up in Montana was, it was a former range that was given to a mining company. So had to clear that out. These things are out there. They pop up.
So like going like kind of switching gears here back towards like some of the more premeditated stuff that we may see, right? So somebody, whoever it is meaning to do us harm, and they're going to use some kind of explosive device to do that. What's the difference that typically we will see? I got a call for an explosion, and I'm working in Fairview, and I'm oh my, like gas, right? Like we just had one in Wappingers Falls.
Yep.
What are the differences that I'm going to see from like a gas explosion to, a potential explosion with something either it's homemade or commercially made?
Yeah.
Like what?
So I would say, off the top of my head, right off the bat, and it may not necessarily be, as obvious, but when going back to talking about primary fragmentation and secondary fragmentation, so is it, are you looking at, things that are, you'll see more of a pattern with something that was like commercial built or purpose built. That from the point of initiation, it's going to a detonation is an omnidirectional event. So you're going to propel fragmentation or whatever else you have around you, 360 degrees. But especially if there's a frag pattern along the walls of, clearly, obviously, hey, or you see pieces of shrapnel, ball bearings, things like that, nails, but not just, fresh nails, fresh, hot, not rusty nails. Well, I guess they could have used rusty in their device, but you're gonna see these things, and if they're involved in the detonation itself, that blast seat, when it cranks off, it gets really, really hot. So that whatever metal that's around there, you're going to see it get that really neat color of like those blues and reds and oranges and those pieces of metal, depending on how close they were to the blast itself. And if you've got a lot of those pieces, I mean, the thing probably started, at that point, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say, if you're looking at a gas explosion. So with explosives, you've got a very identifiable, blast seat. Usually, from where it's not usually, from where it started. There's a blast seat. Obviously it could vary a little bit when we're talking about cratering, how high off it was off the ground, or if it was up on the second floor. Obviously, okay, you're not going to have evidence of a crater, but you're still going to have a blast seat. There's going to be a point of origin, just like we would with fire, Whereas if you're looking at something that's more of like a gas type thing, okay, there's going to be a point of initiation, but that point of initiation isn't necessarily going to be the hottest part of that fire. The thing is it's going to travel at a very rapid speed, obviously, because now that gas has been ignited. So, it's converting, but it's not going to that overpressure of that package. So let's say in the case of, a house, okay, with gas, that overpressure isn't going to get exceeded for what the materials of the house is built by until it gets to a certain point. So like, we've all, light your grill outside. It's not light enough. You keep on going. Eventually, and it flashes over. Well, yeah, chances are you probably didn't, blow up your grill. But if you left that cranking for long enough, that you're gonna, and even let's say you close the lid, so now it's contained, so that blast overpressure, which is what you're looking at. And it's the same thing with a gasoline, with gas, not gasoline necessarily, but a gas explosion. Right. It's that overpressure that's eventually going to overcome. So if you have a little bit, that fire is going to consume that gas, and you might just have a little bit of an elevation in pressure. But if you have a lot of gas, obviously there's more of that to consume. It's going to, that pressure is going to raise rapidly, and it's going to exceed the capacity of that building to hold that detonation. So the blast, the point of origin isn't going to be as obvious, other than how much gas, did this actually fill up? Was it enough to fill up a room, or was it enough to fill up a house? So depending on how much is actually released, it's gonna be the determining factor of where, but I think the blast heat is going to be a lot less obvious. Right. You're going to see a lot of things more uniform, because again, that gas is going to, once it cranks off, it's going to consume everything every gas molecule is going to consume the gas molecule next to it, and it's all going to be consumed. So I don't think you're going to have as obvious a spot of, hey, look, this detonation occurred right here at this spot. You might have more, damage in a certain section because that's where more gas was when it actually ignited. Yeah, absolutely. But, you're looking more holistically at larger sections of something that cranked off, like in a building, for example.
Right.
So if you're going to, so let's say, take an example of, a house. I saw some of the pictures for the Wappingers event. If that had been an actual explosive event, to mimic that same kind of destruction, I'd say that more than likely, one, you're going to have a crater. Two, the surrounding areas, the surrounding buildings will definitely have fragmentation in them, and you're going to have a lot more. I think you're going to have a lot more impact from not just primary fragmentation, which would be anything you purposely put in there to project out, but the secondary fragmentation, like we talked about, like construction materials and whatnot. I think you're going to have more impact, because your explosions, your explosives. You're looking at, man, I want to say it's like, for the sake of just easy math, somewhere in the realm of like 20,000 feet per second, give or take a little bit. So if you're looking at something with that kind of energy, for an explosion, that's going to have a lot more, penetration. So, and I think in order to take down that building, I think you would have had a crater. I definitely think you would have seen more, more burning, because again, those gas molecules, it was gas, which, obviously seemed like it was to me, other than what was in the immediate vicinity, where there's been enough, other than that, where the explosive limits, have dispersed enough where it's not going to carry out to that far. So
Right.
the dissipation is going to be a lot more rapid, So I mean,
so it's really like and I don't want to say like this because I mean in both cases there's destruction, but there's a severity to it where it's not just this is used to I forget who, I think it was Dane Cook who said blown to smithereens, right? But like this really is going to be like in the crater. You've mentioned that a couple of times, and I think that's important for people to know is that on a gas explosion we don't typically see a crater formed. Like I don't want to say it's impossible because I don't know if it actually is impossible, but like with a bomb,
I would say
something is there.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely, and I would say it's possible only under like certain specific conditions. So let's say you've got, man, I think you can get, if you got a propane tank to high order,
Right.
I think
this is not a challenge for anybody listening, by the way.
Yeah, please don't try it. But if that were to be the scenario, you come across it along those lines, you might have something surface, but it's lacking that penetration. So when you're talking about just ignitable substances in the air, you're lacking that physics, that force, of it being propelled at that, at that Mach, oh my God, speed to be able to disrupt, the ground and disperse it. So with explosions, you've got some considerations in there. So you've got thermal event, you've got a blast event, and you've got a fragmentation event. So you've got these three things. Now, a gas explosion is going to have, obviously, you'll have some second and third order effects, but primarily it's a thermal event, with just a gas explosion. You're not really worrying about like blast overpressure, to that extent. Yes, the house came from together because the pressure exceeded what the house could sustain in that thermal event as it was rapidly expanding gas. But in a detonation, you're looking at this thing. It's gonna, these blast waves. They're really, really interesting. The way that they go through. And this wave is coming through with such power that depending on what it's actually reflecting off of, will intensify, and you can actually get that, and you can shape that in a way that it'll be more powerful in a direction than what initially, like if you just set it off in a open field, versus a room with some corners. That blast wave actually has a tendency to add to itself and become more intense in certain areas. So you'll see certain effects like that you wouldn't see with a gasoline explosion or a gas explosion. I'm sorry.
And I think that's I was just thinking of I want to say it was an embassy attack in Africa, maybe Nairobi. I don't know if that's but like it was a vehicle borne IED, and it was how it was placed, and then obviously nobody's like getting a text message that says like, hey, it's IED attack time, please come to the windows or stay away. But like there's a lot of commotion, so people came to the windows, and when that blast hit, that pressure wave, as you're talking, like it kind of bounced off the buildings, and unintentionally by the actors did a lot more damage because of everything that happened. So
what they call refractory blast waves. If you're close enough to the blast heat, so a blast, that wave is going to attenuate the further out that it goes. But if you reflect it back on itself, you can actually potentiate it and increase the effect of it.
And if I remember correctly, for Oklahoma City, when we went to the memorial, like one of the tour guides was there, and he's like, it was blocks where windows had shattered. Like we're talking like not like next door, like, hey, this building filled with gas had exploded, and like these two, we're talking like this pressure wave literally traveled down the street, shattering glass on the way. And I think the guys in the firehouse like felt it, like, because you could like that's what you don't typically have from, or I don't, it's you don't typically have it, but you don't see that kind of destruction from that gas explosion.
I think that's spot on right there. And that's one of the things that we actually. So now I do explosive safety for the DoD. And that's one of the things that we consider is what is the material these buildings are built nearby. And actually, NATO has done a really good job with updating their standard, and they now account for what they call vulnerable building distance. So if you've got buildings that have like a much larger, glass face, like a lot of these modern constructions do,
Right.
you have to consider that and adjust how much explosives we can store in a certain area, or we got to start coming up with mitigations for different types of glass and different types of construction materials to go into that, because it's a factor.
I think the war in Ukraine has kind of, and this what's happening now in Israel and Gaza is showing us what explosives can really do and that's one of the things when I know when this kicked off, the stuff that was an October 7th attacks, I started to show the PowerPoint that you had shared with me on suicide bombers, but like it was like, hey, like this is stuff that we need to start looking at, but like being able to see what these events look like, because I've always felt like you're going to show up and like the Boston Marathon, like there was some very specific wound injuries that happened because of that pressure cooker and that omnidirectional blast wave that you talk about.
Yeah, and that goes back to like even propelling that fragmentation. That primary frag that it's coming off of it. Absolutely, yeah. You're looking at a different event than you would. Oh, is this just an accident? Was it was it a gas main that went off? Yeah,
right.
Because that thermal event tends to that also attenuates a lot quicker from the point of initiation. So it's going to fizzle out, if you will. For it's a to use easier words, it'll fizzle out a lot easier. So, but again, with blasts, that wave, it's going to carry a lot further. So it's got more bang for your buck, if you will.
Now, this is not. I think we do a really good job on the podcast to stay away from politics, but it would be remiss to not talk about certain facts that are happening in our country. And I know there's been several. I don't want to say folks like yourself, but retired CIA people who work for the Department of State, people who have different jobs for the government, who have openly been talking about finding people from foreign countries that we used to have troops in. Maybe we withdrew in a way that was not very thought out and executed, but like we're getting these people coming across the border. I know I have a friend of mine who works on the border as a firefighter, and he outright said, and he's like, as a Mexican American, he's like, listen, you take somebody from some of these countries where we would just rapidly withdrew troops out of, and people hanging off of planes, and you shave their beards, they look just like me. Mm-hmm. And until they start speaking, you won't know that they're from another country other than Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, I personally met, I met a plethora of Afghanis when I was over there that had red hair. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's look at that. That's neat. It's not what you consider, the standard, look. I've seen them out there, that are, blonde, blue eyes and blonde hair. From a lot of times, I think a lot of it might have been the byproduct of the Russian invasion for specifically that area. But yeah, they don't necessarily have to. There's not one set look,
And I mean, even
no, it's not. That's silly.
And even that, like we saw with, and I remember you sharing this with me because you had me download material for you to when you were contracting at one point. But like ISIS did a really good job of utilizing social media and marketing to getting disenfranchised people to do terror attacks. We certainly saw an uptick in that when they were on their rise. And there's talks now of Al Qaeda is actually, people think Al Qaeda is dead, but they're not. Like they're very much a powerhouse. And now that there's this vacuum in Afghanistan, it's the Taliban's back in charge. And there's, it's most likely going to be a place where, terror camps go back. Yeah. So like
the initial reason for us to have gone in there in the first place was because it was a hotbed for being allowed whatever terrorism occurred out there.
Right. And we have other foreign influences that are now in country, doing things. So like there's a lot of and like I said, it's not political, but it's the facts of like there's a lot of factors going into this, which I guess my point is we could potentially, and we are always a potential target, see attacks with explosives, and obviously like what happened in Israel was not not even considering the first and second intifada when they had the suicide attacks. For us as a response, I get this call for this explosion and I show up and I'm like, man, like this isn't gas. There's pot marks of shrapnel. There's a very high, like I'm seeing those signs of that high heat from that explosive device in one area, but no fire because maybe it didn't kick anything off secondary to the explosion. The wounds of people, like what are some things that I may start seeing in that response and things that I have to start looking out for as a first arriving unit? Like, is there going to be a secondary device? Is there somebody who's in a uniform that I've never seen before? It says fire department on it, and why are they calling everybody over to them? Like the Jamie Foxx was in that movie The Kingdom. You and I saw it together, I think. And
that's a really I appreciate the fact that it had highlighted that that it's a targeted attack for first responders, and it's it's even something that even in our training it's considered, that that's why you always check your safe area. So I guess to apply that to what you're asking, if I understand the question right, so some things that you need to consider is going back to doing an initial scene survey. Is your safe area safe? If you backed up enough, is there anything that looks like it might be out of place? Is there anything you can't necessarily clear, and definitively say, hey, look, okay, I think this car is okay, so can you, feasibly, and obviously you've got an operation to conduct, you can't back away, 1,000 meters from something, because you don't have that much hose. That would be ridiculous. So
right.
How far can you reasonably, get out of the area or reposition your vehicles while still being, effective to complete your mission? So you plan for that, but the most important thing is immediately in the area. Is there something right next to me that will kill me? So look under it, look around it, do a quick look, in whatever, in the bushes and what have you. And you can't be completely paranoid that that okay, there might be explosives behind this wall that I can't see in this house. Okay, at the end of the day, there's unfortunately, I guess the easiest way to put it is, there's some luck involved. But there's some things you can do to make it more random. So if, so in terms of like your fire response, when you respond to something, you've got these pre-plans. So let's say you're responding to, I don't know, we'll reference Fairview, say Francis Hospital, or whatever they're calling themselves now. I forget what the new name is, but that hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a pre-plan. You've got an idea of, okay, so if you have a fire over here, we stage the XYZ equipment over here, right? Is that accurate assessment? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if I know that every time I've got this incident, if A happens, then B also happens. All right. So now, if every single time I've got something that occurs, I know that if I'm a casual observer and I want to try some things out, and I've got malicious intent, and I know that every time you guys do this, this response, I know exactly where to put something, like dead on know where to put something. So if I was going to do it, I'd watch what you guys do a couple of times. And if you repeat that thing over and over and over again, I am for sure going to put whatever the heck I want over in that area that you guys are going to stage to get that effect. So now, does that mean, go out there and change your tactics every time? No, there's things that we did in the military. You're always taught never to set up in the same spot each time. You want to avoid it because there's going to be, we definitely had, areas that we were called to frequently, over and over again. Like, let's say I was down in, like, I don't know, downtown Colot, and I knew, okay, well, this area here, we get called to this area for XYZ suspicious package or, device found, what have you. Okay, well, I'm not going to always want to set up on this road right here, this far away, because that's stupid, because I'm in a situation where they're trying to kill us, all the time. And if I sat up in that spot all the time because it was convenient or for whatever reason, that they're definitely going to set something up in that spot. Now, transferring that domestically, I know that's not necessarily that's not practical because you guys are doing these pre-plans for a reason. You're trying to coordinate this response.
And it's typically a fire response, right? Yeah. Like I know I show, like you used the example of the hospital. We show up to the same spot at the hospital, because it's where the alarm panel is, and it's where we start our investigation into an automatic fire alarm. Whereas if it's a fire, we're going to go respond directly to that location. So I think there's like, like you're hitting on a really good point here, is that like in this incident, like kind of, I don't want to even say communicating it, but being like, hey, this isn't normal, be on the lookout.
Yeah. And exactly. So I would say, as an incident commander for something like this, if I walk up and I start seeing this, I recognize that might be the effect of, of an explosive device of some type. Then, as a savvy incident commander, one, I would actually make the call to, on the fly, hey, let's restage our equipment, or maybe, find, do a quick, all right, well, hey, hose is already dropped over here. We're already freaking set up, but let's redirect everybody else that's coming in on mutual aid and what have you into this other location for this particular event. So at least if something does happen, we're minimizing the impact that it happens. Yeah, we might lose some people, we might lose some assets, but at least we didn't lose them all.
Right.
So I think that's kind of an important thing, is to, if you can't mitigate all the risk, at least lower it down as much as you possibly can. So you came, you did the initial response, you guys dropped lines, you got all set up, and all of a sudden it starts looking like it might be this way. Well, if you've got additional assets, I wouldn't park them where you normally parked them. I guess that's the best way to put it, if that makes more sense.
No, it does. And I know I referenced this before, you shared a program with me that was declassified, I hope. No, but it was on suicide bombers, and there's some specific wound patterning.
Yeah.
That happened, as far like, and I remember I showed the guys and they were like actually shocked. And I said, like, hey, if they put nuts in the suicide vest, you're going to see like a perfectly shaped nut outline in their legs or in their body. And there's a photo of that in an autopsy room of like, it cascaded down this poor woman's backside. So, and then but also like you pointed out, the overpressure of that vest on the suicide bomber like pops her head off like a pimple.
Yeah.
And it only happens to one person, and that was the VIP, so to speak.
I don't know how graphic I can get, but basically, essentially what's happening is that again, the further you're out from the blast wave itself and the blast seat, the more it's going to kind of attenuate. But right there in direct contact with that explosive event, that's going to incur things that are, obviously immediately catastrophic. But so what's happening physically is the rest of that compression that's around that vest it's rapidly, compressing and disintegrating and severing everything else that's attached to it. And then the blast wave itself is taking over. So it's going to propel everything that's not immediately destroyed, like a torso. And it's going to propel everything that's no longer attached to things. They become secondary fragmentation. That's it happens almost more often than not.
And for most of us in emergency services, this is a form of, this is a trauma that we'll hopefully never have to see. But like one of the things that I feel like, as an instructor and everything else, you can't prepare yourself for what you can't visualize. So like having access to some of these, like, and I hate saying it, but like some of these scenes, and that, like I said, to put it into words for folks, it's just pretty hard. But like when you see the PowerPoints from Israel, some of the suicide bombings and some of the bombing attacks, and then you kind of get a better understanding of what, like I said, like what a gas explosion looks like versus what something is intentional. It really is. And that one's thing specifically, because I thought maybe it was just a fluke, but then it was like bombing after bombing after bombing was induced by a suicide bomber with a vest. Like these things, like this, like there's just a random severed head.
So, I mean, and that's the thing is, going back to the so what of the matter, why does your audience, and obviously your main focus, why do they care? Well, it's a matter of, again, recognize this is the event that happened, because it's going to change. It should change what your tactics are, and it should change it pretty quickly. Again, going back to that setup, if I came in on a scene and I'm seeing things like this, then I am for sure going to reposition my equipment if I can. Whatever equipment I can move as quickly as possible, I absolutely will reposition and set up a new staging area. And obviously, you're going to have to mobilize some other resources. Of course, you're going to have to get the FBI involved and get them out there and get their experts going. And the FBI is really your, that'll be a lot of your point of your point of coordination, which I would assume would be done through the law enforcement, depending on how your emergency action plan is set up. But that's something very much that needs to happen is you're gonna have to get the experts out there to, do a full on search, and
Right.
come in with the x-rays and come in with, maybe they're using military working dogs or bomb sniffing dogs, what have you, but yeah, the important thing is recognize it right off the bat. That's the so what. You guys, a lot of times are going to be the first thing on the scene, even, more than likely, even before law enforcement, if something like that happened.
Right.
I can't imagine your average, sheriff's department or town, police department walking in there and being like, oh, it's, and something that was, I would think the first assumption is going to be, oh, it's probably a gas explosion, something like that. That's going to be, if I was a first responder back then, before I actually got like training and, a career in this, that would be my first thought. Oh, probably a gas explosion. Well, then why is law enforcement going to walk in there first? No, it's going to be you guys. You're going to walk in there with the meters and check to make sure there's nothing, you're below the LDL and all that stuff like that, or LEL. The police department's not going to do that, so it's going to be on you. So you'll be the first ones to recognize it. You'll be the first ones to identify this is the event that actually occurred. So I think having that, that in your toolkit there to know what you're looking at that's value added without a doubt.
What's I know in the past when we've talked about this, you've hit on something called K factors, and when I talk about the response, so like, I think the ERG will talk about like, oh, a briefcase bomb, a suicide vest, a vehicle-borne one in a car, and then like like a jingle trucks thing that you'd see in Afghanistan, where like a full like a rider truck or a U-Haul packed with explosives. What kind of like? And we've almost been going for an hour here, but like how, because I think that's the other thing of this, right? Is like, hey, like you have the potential for somebody to do something really cruel and intentional and premeditated.
Yep.
It's going to look different if they have a vest on, if they placed a bomb, like what we saw in Boston, or if it's something like Timothy McVeigh, where he drove a truck up with all this stuff in there and parked it and walked away. And there's been a couple flawed attacks in that in New York City in the past couple of years. So like what, I don't know, like just, in 60 seconds, summarize it. No, like summarize what we're looking at with these K factors and the damage, I guess.
So what a K factor is, it's a factor. It's a mathematical equation to figure out the pounds per square inch pressure at a certain distance based off of the amount of net explosive weight of a device. So depending on how big your charge is, that's the NEW, that's the explosive weight, and how far you are from that seat, so it's saying that, okay, if I've got, I can't do the key factor in my head right now,
right?
But if I've got, let's say 10 pounds of explosives, what is my overpressure? I know that, physics is physics. So now some explosives are more potent than others. Okay. So everything they use and what's even in the ERG is based off a TNT equivalent. Okay. So TNT is a factor of 1, so depending on what it's actually made of, that's going to vary what the equivalent is, but you convert it into a TNT equivalent. And then, so if I know I've got 10 pounds of TNT equivalent explosives at a certain distance, I know that, at like this distance, I might be at like, 5 PSI or 10 PSI, but, I know that about, and the important thing with the K factor is that at certain PSIs, different things happen, so like, a structure, that can, will be just fine out at like, let's say 1.2 PSI, but, maybe you're going to have some personal effects, so, damage to eardrums, things like that, so it's at those different K factors. And that's kind of what that ERG is doing without actually telling you what it's doing, is it's, you're looking at these potential effects, at these certain distances, but it is a function of pounds per square. It is a function of pressure. So you're looking at that. That's what those K factors are there for, because especially with the structure, fragmentation is a factor. Fragmentation is probably going to affect people more than it's going to affect a building. So when we're talking about, keeping people safe, we're a little more worried about fragmentation up till, like, obviously if they're too close, the blast over pressure is going to liquefy them anyways. But when you start getting further out. But so fragmentation is going to be an issue, to people, but a building's not going to really care. Chances are the building's going to block that. But as we get closer in, now rather than, that building may very well collapse because that blast overpressure is too intense at that distance. So it's going to exceed what that building is capable of actually sustaining. So that's what these different K factors are for, is, what is the pressure at this explosive at this distance? And that's what the erg is actually driving down to. So
and so like for to like what I see in, like, so if I load a Toyota Camry,
yeah,
actually that's a horrible example, that's my vehicle. If I load up a Ford Taurus, all right, with explosives, as much as I can pack in there.
Did I just see you buy a Ford Taurus yesterday? It was old. Had bad shot.
What's like, and I parked that next to a building that has the potential to do some significant damage.
Yeah. So off the top of my head, without, I don't have an erg in my head, but I can, visually stack it. I could think, okay, well, how many cases of C4 can I fit in this thing? It's a lot. I can fit, realistically, I can fit a couple 100 pounds without being it too obvious. Right. I think with covering it up enough.
Why would it be too obvious if there is more than a couple 100 pounds?
Well, one, actual physical space.
Okay.
So that's, where am I going to hide it? And then two, so I think I can confidently fit that in like a trunk, or like take out the rear seats, depending on the vehicle we're talking about. So if we're talking about Ford Taurus, I think it's a pretty wide back seat, but eventually it's going to start to become a little bit obvious. And that's, you kind of hit on a key point that, when we look at things like VBIDs, and we're starting to try and see if it's a VBID, that's some of the training that you get is looking at vehicle-borne IED, sorry. Yeah. And that's what you're referring to with, packing a vehicle full of explosives, but there's other signs, as you increase weight, like if you get a bunch of fat bastards in a car, the car's going to sink a little bit, right? So you get, several 100 pounds of stuff in something, so it's going to sit a lot lower. It's going to be squatted. Why does it not quite look right? If you've got bad shocks, you look at your car, you're like, oh damn, I think I got a shock that went out because it's sitting a lot lower. So in terms of like coming up on this vehicle, why does it look like the tires are, one, why do they all look kind of flat? And two, why do they look like they're close to the housing of the car, or the wheel wells? There's a word I was looking for, Yeah. So that's, and the more you put in there, obviously, the more obvious it's going to be. So if somebody goes really overboard, it's going to stick out a lot more. But I don't think, that's, so personally, I think you can get away with doing, quite a bit of devastation with, even before it becomes too obvious, so I think that's where you have to start to kind of get in the mindset that, if you came up, chances are the fire department's getting called because an event already happened, something's bringing you to that location. So, if that starts to look at that, then you can start looking around and say, okay, well, this doesn't quite look right, and so if you see things like that, obviously, again, reposition.
And you, like you said, the event's already happened, but it's also possible. I think what we saw in New York City, if I remember this correctly, is that the device didn't operate correctly, didn't explode. They got there, and then they were like, "Whoa, this has nothing to do with the fire department," but like it helped them. And where I was getting at with some of this, with the VBID stuff, it's going to give you the idea of the evacuation distances, right? Like I come up on a Jeep Cherokee, and there's a bunch of stuff wrapped around propane tanks in the back of that vehicle.
Man, that's a really great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Sorry to interrupt you there, but as you're talking about that, so evacuation distances and protection. So again, going back to the so what? Okay, so if I think that I'm suspected, I've got something that I'm suspected of. So use the ERG as your guideline, as a base, example to try and figure out how far away I have to get. Okay, and so now again, that's only going to affect blast overpressure. All right, but now you also have to consider fragmentation. So when you position your people, don't have them out in the open. Line of sight is the main thing. So when we go to mitigate explosive hazards, especially in terms of like storage sites and what have you of explosives, our biggest concern is high velocity, low angle fragmentation. So again, that blast being omnidirectional, the stuff that is, coming from the low parts is going to have the most energy projected directly out, because the stuff that's going high, it comes up, okay, but gravity and everything else take effect first, and then it'll lob back down, kind of like a mortar, or whatever else you throw up in the air. So a lot of that energy is taken up by being projected up top, high and then low. But that low angle, fragmentation, it's coming directly at you. So line of sight, if you can see it, it can see you. So in terms of like trying to set up a good protection area, you put something else in front of you, that at least put a barricade of some type in front of you, whether it's, hey, we reposition this engine over this way, and we're going to stand on the other side of this thing, or or we get behind some jersey barriers, or a building, corner of a building, and set up there. That's really important to consider, because
you
the blast
said before
overpressure,
it's 20,000 feet per second.
Yeah, well, 20,000 ish. Like I said, some explosives go a little faster, some go a little bit slower.
You're not going to say, "Oh," and duck out of the way of this thing.
Yeah, no, you're not.
There will be no time.
Yeah, you're not going to have time. So what you want to do, like I said, if you're, when you start talking about, so in setting up a safe area, I think that's the important thing, is making sure that you get far enough away, because that blast overpressure, unfortunately, that doesn't care about a barricade. It's going to go around it, and it's still going to be a factor. So that's going to be mitigated by distance. So the further away you can get. But that fragmentation, that frag is going to carry, depending on how much explosives there are, that fragmentation could carry far more and still be lethal at a greater distance than what that blast overpressure will. So that you just mitigate by putting a barricade, at least in front of you, and preferably overhead for that lob stuff, because that lob stuff is going to travel further. And it's still going to come down. It's still heavy chunks of material, it's still going to come down. So if you can get some overhead cover too, great, But at the very least, mitigate that low angle, high velocity, fragmentation that could come out to you. If you can see it, it can see you. So stop looking at it.
Yeah.
At least protect some of your body, and take some binos. So that's one of the things that we do. Even so. A basic overall approach to EOD. So I'm gonna, again, when I set up my safe area, there's some things I try and consider. But and then when I'm actually going on the device, which I don't recommend, please don't ever approach anything that you think might be a device. But in terms of just general factors of just personal risk mitigation, is I try and eliminate all the things that are going to be that could kill me, that are out of my control. So like. That's when we start looking for command wire, stuff like that, some kind of, radio controlled devices, things along those lines. Once I've gone through and I've eliminated that factor and taken it all out of that factor, then, I start, then the only thing left to kill me is me, like stepping on IED or something along those lines, which, so, mitigate by looking at ground signs and, mine detectors and what have you, but take all the external controls, the things that I don't have a ability to control over. I try and take those out of the equation, as much as possible. So, and again, so for you guys, it's going to be most set up by, getting the hell away,
Mm-hmm.
So
it's one of the few times where retreating, I think you say like time distance shielding, like this is something that you really want to get away from it, like get the victims out if you can get them out, and then there's no reason to admire your work here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, thank you for coming in on this episode. I'm really excited that we got to do this today. I know you've sent me a preliminary PowerPoint in the past. Like where can people find you first and foremost?
Well, I mean, email is probably going to be the best way right now.
Okay.
So, and that's christopher.l.morabito@gmail.com. So if you have some questions, even as a department wide, and you just want to get some information or what have you, or maybe we could put our heads together and put something together to present. Obviously, I can coordinate through you, of course. Here's you, they know you, and you clearly we talk, several times a week. So that's a very easy way. But no, I'm happy to answer any questions that come up. Feel free to email me. I've got a smartphone, so I check my email pretty regularly. And so if you're if you have a need, I'm reluctant to answer questions for somebody that's just, maybe listening and just trying to do some shit in their backyard. But
Right.
if you've got an official need, I'm happy to help.
Well, and there's two things that I think that are important to understand for the people out there. Like, one, you have worked on developing a class. So if there's a department that wants to hire you to come in and just do an awareness class on IEDs and explosives, that's certainly an option. And the other one is, if you have a military base, one of the things that, like, local EOD units, you can reach out to them, and
Yep.
they are supposed to be able to come and do like presentations on their options, their responses. So these are all resources that people can utilize as well.
The EOD community it's fantastic. We're very much a brotherhood, like you guys are. I'm in several different EOD forums. So a lot of, if you're with a department and you actually, most of these guys are happy to do community outreach. So if maybe you want to set something up, if you're near a base, Fort Drum, Fort Stewart, or, well, I think they renamed it. I forget what the Stewart is now, but you get the idea. If you're near, a base, I might be able to put a feeler out to, any of these forums and possibly even get a unit to come out there, and maybe do some, some training with you guys. Or, like I said, we could put together a class, for specific needs. Happy to do that. Or even if you just have one-offs, requests for information, like, hey, what about this? Something that I didn't cover, I didn't think about. We can talk about it.
Well, Chris, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. Stick around for a minute once we're done here. But everybody, this is Rob, National Fire Radio, with Christopher Morabito, retired United States Army. You retired as an E6?
Yeah, I got it as a staff sergeant.
Staff sergeant, okay.
Fortunately, I got a little bit injured, so I got broken.
Yeah, but also a former New York State paramedic, National Registry, volunteer firefighter. Your dad, consumer of whiskeys, fine and cheap, and bourbon. So, Chris, thank you for coming on today. I appreciate it, brother.
Hey, it's my pleasure, man. I hope that your listeners got something out of it. Thanks for having me. Seriously, I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, everybody. This is Rob, National Fire Radio. Stay safe out there. We'll talk to you later.